Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I'm John Kuh, and I am joined today by pitcher list writer Kyle McCarthy. Welcome to the show, Kyle. How are you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I know this is the first time for you on the pod, so for our listeners who aren't familiar with your work, could you just give a quick introduction? Maybe to how'd you get involved in fantasy baseball? What teams are
Mhm.
you a fan of? Stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is my first year at Pitcher List. Started writing here about a month or two ago. Been a huge fantasy fan my whole life. Playing it since oh, a while now. But huge fantasy baseball fan. Started writing about fantasy probably about 6 months ago. Just kind of freelance writing anywhere. Um, and kind of just exploring all routes. And as far as team fandom, I'm a huge Washington Commanders fan. That's a little
Ah,
aside for
okay.
football, but big DC area. I'm Orioles, kind of lean Orioles Nationals, a little bit of both. So yeah, all DC and yeah, huge baseball fan. So.
Nice. Do you have a hot take about either the Nationals or the Orioles this upcoming season?
I'm little pessimistic on the Orioles right now, just because the news about Grayson Rodriguez is a little
Yeah.
disappointing. He was supposed to take that leap forward, and it's all about health with him really. But the Nationals look pretty exciting. I mean, with that young core of hitters, we'll see about the pitching. I'm still a little tentative to say anything. I like Gore. I like Mackenzie Gore, but anything else is kind of I don't know, out of my bounds. So
Yeah. That young hitting crew is really nice.
yeah, it's exciting. Yeah.
I have a couple of those guys in Dynasty, so
Mhm. Yeah, I
yeah.
took James Wood pretty high in the TGFBI, so I'm
Oh,
big on
sure.
him. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I want to be optimistic about Dylan Cruz, but like
hmm
I'm hoping he can just like get to the 20 homer mark. If he can get to there, then
right.
I feel good about
hmm
him. But if it's like
Yeah,
a 10-30 season, it's like, oh man, like
yeah, I
it feels
know.
like it's like only 60% of your potential or something like
Yeah,
that. So
I think the power could be there. I was actually looking at him. He kind of popped. I did a little this process plus kind of laggers,
sure.
and
Yeah.
he was one that was his WRC plus was in the 70s, but his process plus was pretty good. I think it was like around 118 or so.
Okay.
So maybe just a little bit unlucky, but I still am a fan. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take that hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Anyways, we're here to talk about Kyle's articles on bat speed, which is super interesting. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder: you can follow our podcast on Twitter at This Week PL. Make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform that you listen to, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're actually also on YouTube now on the Pitch List channel. So if you prefer a video format, we don't do anything special on the video. But if you would rather watch this podcast instead of listen to it, we're also there. So yeah, wherever you listen to or watch the podcast, please leave a 5-star review if you enjoy listening to the show. Now we're going to get into Kyle's two articles on bat speed, and so before we even like talk about the articles and the players that you highlighted, bat speed data is like a relatively new thing, right? I think it was
Mhm.
just something
Yeah.
that kind of came to us in Statcast last year,
Mhm.
finally giving us some insight into the mechanics of hitting. We have so much
Yeah.
data into the mechanics of pitching, but I feel like this is maybe one of the first few things that we'd be able to see from the hitter side. So just as just kind of to help us get into understanding bat speed, why is it important and what can bat speed tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a fresh tool. I believe it was implemented last year in May last season, so it's first year for it. And yeah, I think it's just kind of a direct translator for, the ability to hit for power, ability to hit the ball hard. I kind of compared it in the article to, velocity for pitchers, just because,
Hmm.
you see all the top pitchers, they all have, premium velocity, inevitably leads to them, breaking, but there's no signs that bat speed points to hitters breaking yet, at least. So, um, yeah, I think it's useful, especially in small samples like velocity, because pretty early on like what a pitcher's velocity is, and I think similar to bat speed, we know pretty early what their max bat speed is, what their average bat speed is. Will kind of give us some signal there, and I think kind of an example, subtle example last year was somebody that popped, these bat speed metrics, swing length metrics was Heliot Ramos. He
Yeah.
popped as having somebody with, plus bat speed, I believe around 74, 75 miles an hour, and then, shorter than average swing length, which is kind of that ideal combo you're looking for. And it was kind of before his little breakout in the summer, He kind of popped as he was going around the circles as somebody who had these characteristics, and he went off to have a really good season. So I think it's definitely interesting. It's in bat speed is inherently connected to contact point. So
Mm.
if you're pulling the ball more, you're reaching the ball, you meet the ball out in front of the plate. So that just gives the bat more time to reach max speed, which makes sense. And the article for the five hitters had higher pull rates in the second half, so I think it all makes sense. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. Something I didn't actually think about
mhm,
how where you make contact with the ball
mhm.
also impacts how fast the bat is going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I remember I think it was Kyle Bland here at Pitch had tried to do some math last summer about trying to figure out like what's the acceleration of a bat, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that really plays into this idea of like, yeah, you want to be able to, in a sense, pull the ball just because that is going to be the
Mhm,
fastest point of your bat.
yeah.
As you're going through the swing. So yeah, that's definitely something I haven't thought about, but it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, yeah. Ideally, we get as once we get further in the future with this technology, we can regulate for contact point.
Hmm.
But right now, I think it's all kind of connected a little bit.
Yeah, and I know if this was a couple years ago, there was some article I think it was on Fangraphs about how exit velocity is like almost completely tied into pitching. Like there's like one thing
Yeah,
that like
yeah.
hitters
I've
have
seen that.
influence
Mhm,
over
mhm.
exit velocity, and I guess one of that maybe that stat
Yeah.
is bat speed. But
Mhm,
even the idea that like when you connect with a pitch in front of the plate, it's actually moving faster than when it crosses the plate,
mhm.
a couple inches later, however microscopic of a
Right.
change that is. But
Mhm.
the faster a ball is coming in, technically the
Yeah,
higher the exit velocity you can get on that ball as well. So
for
even
sure.
that
Yeah.
idea of like pulling the ball, like you're technically hitting the ball when it's traveling faster than
Mhm.
if you had a little bit of a later swing, and
Right.
you're hitting the ball as it crosses the plate. So
Right. Yeah.
anyway, some really interesting nerdy physics stuff there.
Yeah. Yeah, some of it
um,
goes way beyond me, but it is interesting. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I think it's interesting that you relate this to pitching velocity
Mhm.
because the interesting thing about the two articles you wrote were about one of them was about guys who increase bat speed, and I think that's a very
Mhm.
obvious like, oh yeah, if you swing the bat faster, you will hit the ball harder, right?
Mhm.
Like that's
Mhm.
very easy to understand.
Right.
And then you wrote an article on bat speed reducers, or just this idea
Mhm.
that like tinkering with bat speed, like decreasing it by,
Mhm.
half a mile per hour, can potentially find some improvement, which I think
Yeah.
maybe runs counter to what we think about in just terms of just like, well, if you swing the bat harder, you should hit the ball harder and it should work better. But I
Mhm.
think in terms of velocity, right? Like just because a guy can throw absolute gas does not mean
Yeah.
that they're going to be, a great pitcher, right?
Mhm.
Velocity
Yeah.
does not mean everything. So
Exactly. Yeah.
how can reducing bat speed improve your performance at the plate?
Yeah. Definitely. So I think for one, I think what makes sense is, reducing bat speed can just improve contact ability and, bat control. That's kind of
Mm,
the
yeah.
first thing that sticks out. That's why, I think a lot of the hitters that I kind of looked at, they had higher end bat speed. They had, above average bat speed. So they had a little bit of room to maneuver, a little bit of bat speed to concede. So the slight trade-off of, conceding a little bit of bat speed, shortening up a little bit, um, in favor of making more contact. They can maintain majority of their quality of contact, their batted ball metrics. So I think it's a fair trade off in a lot of cases for to just sacrifice a little bit of that bat speed um, in exchange for contact, because that contact is what the hit tools is what derails a lot of these guys that have that premium bat speed. These really tooled up guys like Joe Adele, who we'll get to a little bit later. Um, but he's definitely a prime example of somebody that could concede some bat speed to in favor of making more contact, which is just to allow the ceiling to be higher for one, and then the floor not to be totally bottomed out. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and as you mentioned, we'll probably talk about this in a little bit with some of
mhm,
the players you mentioned. But it's like
mhm,
if a guy has like a 90th percentile bat speed,
mhm.
reducing that by a little bit to just be able to
Yeah,
control your bat a little bit better, um, it makes sense in terms of just like, yeah, that's going to improve probably the
Mhm.
quality of your plate appearances.
Yeah.
So yeah, super interesting. All right, so let's get into the players then that you highlighted in
Mhm.
each of these articles. And we're going to start with the guys who improved their bat speed in 2024. And we're going to start with Jaron Duran, who,
Mhm.
yeah, pretty meteoric rise last season. First full year in the majors. He did play, I think, over 100 games in
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah. He's
Um,
Iron Man.
yeah, but yeah, finally got to a full season last year. 21 homers, 34 stolen bases, 285 average. Just like an incredible breakout season for him.
Yeah.
How did his improvement in bat speed mirror his just general improvement throughout the season?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think like if you look at his shape of the season, like not a whole lot changed production wise. Like it was pretty similar. But I think his, the biggest thing that he improved throughout his career was, early on I think he always had, these high max EVs, which is, kind of a proxy for bat speed.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's super interesting. But the biggest thing that he raised was his ability to make contact to bring that strikeout rate down, which is what derails a lot of these guys, like we mentioned before. Um, but yeah, he improved his contact ability, and that kind of allowed him to tap into more of his raw power. And because his current approach is it's super effective for him, obviously, because he 285 average, still 20 plus homers, super fascinating combo. But he did kind of I compared him to Julio Rodriguez just as far as batted ball distribution, because they're very similar as far as ground ball, fly ball, all those sorts of things. But the biggest difference is pull rate, of course, and
Hmm.
that's where the difference in home run totals lie. Um, but he did, Duran did tick up that pull rate in the second half. It wasn't anything crazy, and I don't think he should, sell out to pull the ball because I don't think that would. I think that would obviously have a negative effect on his strikeout rate, and his average just wouldn't be as high. So I think his approach does work for him. But if he can, toggle between, hitting for a higher because he has flashed higher pull rates in the minor leagues. So if he can, toggle both of those approaches, I think he because he has the raw power. I think he could have, just a 25 homer season at some point.
Yeah, one stat that you highlight that I wanted to zero in on a little bit more is you mentioned fast swing rate.
Hmm.
About a pretty dramatic improvement from the first half to the second half,
Hmm.
27-ish% to basically 48%. Can you
Yeah.
explain a little bit about what fast swing rate is and
Hmm.
what does that tell us about Duran?
Yeah. So fast swing rate is, I believe, is just the swings over 75 miles an hour is what
Okay,
it looks
yeah.
at. So that's what it looks at, and I think that kind of points to the tinkering aspect, the ability to or the willingness to try something different, and I think that kind of signals that like he was swinging a lot harder more in the second half. So maybe he was trying to because I mean he did pull the ball more, so maybe he was trying to hit for more. He didn't exact. I think he hit 10 homers in the first half, 10 homers in the second half. So not a huge difference, but his it does show a willingness and. I think that's interesting. And it's not maybe the most ideal to pull the ball at his ballpark, just because
Yeah.
Fenway with the Green Monster, and
Yeah.
it's just not the best for lefty pull power. But if he does have that in him, I do think it makes him a little more interesting. He's a great player, regardless. Like,
Hmm.
not going to change my opinion on him, but I think it makes him a little more interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think looking at how he improved over the season, it feels at least a little repeatable that like it wasn't just like, oh, he had really good swings
Mhm.
in
Yeah,
like 1 month, right? It was like, oh, it was a
yeah,
consistent increase
yeah. He
over the entire
wasn't
season.
streaky. Yeah, he wasn't streaky at all. He was very consistent throughout the season. So.
Yeah. All right, cool. Uh, Another name you mentioned, which is actually the last name of this article, we'll talk. We'll maybe go back to some of these other names, but Gavin Lux,
Mhm.
super
Yeah.
interesting name here because obviously longtime Dodgers prospect, um, could never seem to kind of break out though. It was like this
Yeah.
guy was consistently in the lineup, but he's like, oh well, he's at best like the nine hitter
Yeah. Kind of
or
unwilling to trade him in any package. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's like
Yeah.
he's like a
Yeah.
can't trade guy, and then at the end of the day, like the
Right.
Dodgers send him to Cincinnati
Yeah. For
for
nothing. Yeah.
pennies on the dollar, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of reflected by the fact that his current ADP right now is in the 400. So
Yeah.
there's not
Exactly.
a lot
Yeah.
of hope behind Gavin
Yeah.
Lux. and yet I think you highlight him in this article because hey, there was actually kind of an improvement that we saw between the first and
Hmm.
second half of the season. Um, yeah, so what do you think is repeatable, or maybe what happened to Gavin Lux in that second half of the season last year,
Hmm.
and what about that might be repeatable in 2025?
Hmm. Yeah, so I highlighted, just as how disastrous his first half was. He was one of three regulars to have a slugging below 300, which is, just really, really poor.
Yeah.
But kind of what the interesting part of it was, I highlighted a piece by Mike Petriello in that article, and he highlighted a few, contact-oriented hitters that were just kind of, slap hitter type, um, that kind of sold out, not sold out, but they like showed a increase in fast swing rate, those sort of things, increased bat speed. And Gavin Lux was on there, and that was kind of in the middle of his hot streak. I believe it was in August or something. Um, but he obviously sustained it through, the end of the season. It was really a poor stretch. I'm not saying because it was around 150 WRC plus. I'm not saying he's going to do that, but his quality of contact did, take a substantial jump. It was around a 10% barrel rate, 47% hard hit rate, which is easily his career bests in those areas. And that was over. I mean, that's not nothing. That was over the second half. It was an inflated BABIP, so that certainly plays a role. But I mean,
Hmm.
those are still strong numbers that, um, like, I don't think he'll sustain over a full season. But if he can meet somewhere in the middle of, I believe, around 6% is his career barrel rate. If he can, get that up to 7 or 8, and he doesn't necessarily have to, even with a ballpark in Cincinnati. I
Hmm.
mean, that's just a great. I believe it's the best ballpark for lefty power. So um, there's certainly he's still young enough. He's only 27 to where he can blend together these different skill sets he's shown, because he was kind of contact oriented before this, and um, just kind of he had a good walk rate. But if he can, because another thing I was looking at is interesting now, but he had a 65 grade raw power on Fangraphs, but
Oh,
he's
okay.
he's obviously never shown that in the big leagues,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But he's still young enough, and maybe he can, blend, like I said, blend together these different approaches he's shown. Because the strikeout rate did tick up in the second half.
Hmm.
That's kind of a trade off, and he'll make that trade off all day. But
Right.
over a full season, we'll see what it looks like.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I don't have his stats up right in front of me.
Hmm.
But how did yeah, that kind of improvement, so to speak, in faster swing, more
Hmm.
barrels,
Yeah.
higher x, like searching after high x velocities? How did that actually like impact his strikeout rates?
Yeah, so he definitely did tick up. I believe it was a 25% strikeout rate in the second half. Let me see what it was in the first half. It was, yeah, 20%, which is right around his career average in the
Okay.
first
Yeah.
half. So um, he definitely changed some things, and he actually walked more in the second half.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
Walked more, struck out more, hit for more power. So I mean, that's certainly a trade-off he would take.
Yeah.
But like we said, the bat I think the BABIP was near 400, which is pretty ridiculous. But if he can, like I said, blend together, a little bit of power, faster swing with his, having the back pocket his former approach of two strikes, shorten up and make contact. So
Hmm. Yeah, I think the challenge for Lux now is figuring out where he fits in that
yeah,
Cincinnati Red infield because it's just so chock full of young stars
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Um, if he can get 500 plate appearances, I think this
Hmm.
season, I think
Yeah,
that'd be great. But it's just so hard to determine how does he fit
yeah,
in that group. Just because I feel like they have so many good players that it's like as soon as someone's on a hot streak, they're in
yeah,
there, and if someone's on a cold streak, you're out. Like
yeah,
it probably
yeah.
is very
Because
vicious to be there.
I kind of pointed out that like it seems like they were a good offense, but they were like bottom five ish in WRC plus last year as a team. So I mean,
Yeah.
anybody that's hitting, I feel like is gonna stick. And if Lux gets off to a hot start or something, then he could uh he could be in there a lot. So
Right. Yeah, I think so. Roster Resource currently has him penciled in as the third starting third baseman, which
okay,
probably bodes well
yeah,
for him.
yeah,
And I guess as a lefty, it also helps. You're going
for
to
sure,
just be
yeah,
facing more righties for sure.
yeah, good point.
But yeah, they've got Jamer Candelario starting at first, and then Christian Encarnacion Strand on the bench right now, which like
Hmm.
one of those
Interesting.
guys
Yeah.
goes on a hot streak and all of a sudden
Mhm.
maybe they're shifting plays
Yeah,
around in the
I feel like
infield.
it was a lot more loaded the Reds infield like a couple years ago. Like it felt like it was like maybe even last year it was really
Mm,
crowded. But now like India's gone and
yep.
Steer's gone to the outfield, so kind of lightened up a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see if that allows Lux to get a bit more
Hmm.
playing time. One player I did want to highlight is a guy who's technically not replacing Lux, but he's in Los Angeles now, where
Hmm.
Lux used to be, and that's
Yeah.
Michael Conforto.
Yeah.
And I think what's fascinating about this is that you look at all the names that you've got in here. It's like it's Jern Duran, it's Mason Wynn, uh, Miguel
Yeah.
Amaya, Gavin Lux,
Young
like all these
guys.
young
Yeah.
guys, and then there's this
Right.
30 year, 32-year-old Michael Conforto, also
Right.
somehow improving his bat speed. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what did you see in his 2024 season? What kind of hope is there for 2025 for Conforto?
Yeah, Conforto was a guy I really liked, back in it, like, like 7 years ago now, I guess, which is crazy. But yeah, after 30, bat speed just, it takes a big hit. Like
Hmm.
that's just aging curves. That's just how things work. Um, but yeah, kind of looked at me, he just popped because, he had like a quietly good season, 20 homers. Barrel rate was back, and it was his best since I believe 2019, and he hit the ball hard at about 46% rate. All really good numbers. And yeah, I looked at, the bat speed, and it was, like I said, would have been a top 25 mark. His second half bat speed would have been top 25 mark over the full season. Um, so if he can maintain, I mean, it was 73 in the first half, which is still, still plus, still above
Hmm.
average. Um, and I kind of pointed to his max EV being about 114, which is, still that's good. That's a really good max EV. Yeah. And I just think getting further removed from that shoulder surgery, um, which is derailed. I think it derailed a lot of guys. I think Dakota Bellinger, where his power is almost completely sapped. His raw power, at least, is way different than what it was. So it's good to see that he's feeling healthy, that he's kind of back to those good numbers. And I mean, going to the Dodgers, that does not hurt at all. Going to that lineup and then just going to that that organization where they seem to make everybody better, is a good thing for him.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's probably the best situation that you can get
Yeah, it's
into.
you can't get any better. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, it's it's gonna be a long season for a
It
lot of
is.
us.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, again, like I mentioned, there's a couple of the names in the article of Mason Wynn, Miguel Amaya that we didn't get to, but
Hmm.
definitely check out. Yeah, the Bat Speed Risers article from Kyle. But we're gonna move
Hmm.
to the bat suit reducers, or kind of the
Hmm.
tinkerers who kind of did some stuff with their swing.
Yeah,
And we should say, like, this, if you lose like probably a couple miles an hour in your bat speed, that's not a good thing. Like,
yeah, yeah. It's generally not ideal. Yeah.
yeah, like these reductions are, I think you have the right terms of like tinkering, right?
Right.
Legitimate, like, small changes that
Hmm.
result in maybe some
Right.
of positive impacts. And then
Hmm.
I think you do have a really good caveat in your article that's like they reduced their bat speed and things improved, but we're not 100% sure if like
Yeah,
that's the
like
reason why
there's
what's going
there's
on
a
here,
million
right?
factors at play here. Yeah, no doubt. So
Yeah,
you don't want to attribute all of it to, bat speed. So.
exactly. Yeah. So anyways, I think you start off the article with a really good name, because I think he's a guy that a lot of people are wondering what the heck was going on
Hmm.
last year. And that was Matt Olson.
Hmm.
And it was a season that, I mean, this guy was essentially like end of the first round. I mean, when you
Yeah.
hit 50 homers, like you just get
Yeah.
that sort of
Have to be.
that sort of
Yeah.
helium, right? And he
Hmm.
was just awful for probably
Yeah.
the first 3 months, and he still managed to finish with 30 homers, which I think was impressive considering how terrible the season
Hmm.
went.
Yeah.
What was really interesting though was you kind of noted there was a very distinct change in his swing speed between the
Hmm.
first half and the second half. So, what changes did you see in those mechanics that could potentially indicate uh, how he was able to improve in the second half of the season?
Hmm. Yeah, I kind of highlighted, how the Braves collectively, including Matt Olson, just faced a lot more fastballs. That was kind of a theme throughout last year. He was just getting, I mean, he led the league in batter run value in 2023 against fastballs. He just ate them up. He destroyed them. Um, but for whatever reason, in 24, they just ate him up. He couldn't get to him. He was striking out at a career high rate or close to a career high rate, 27%, not walking at all. Um, and he just kind of he was going through it. I mean, he had I believe some of it was BABIP related, but it was really actually no, that's right. It was his BABIP was the same in both halves, so it
Hmm.
really was. You can't point to bad ball luck there. It was really just a poor first half for him. But I think something that's really interesting is that his pull rate was significantly lower than some of the other guys I looked at. His first half pull rate was 46%, and his second half pull rate was 29%, which would be by far a career low for him. So I'm not necessarily saying he should do that in the future, um, but because he definitely should pull the ball. But I think the change in approach with all the fastballs he was seeing was, let the ball travel more, shorten up a little bit, be willing to take it the other way, because he has plenty of power. Like he can hit opposite field home runs. So I think that was kind of what the change he made. Because like we said, he has plenty of bat speed. He can afford to lose a few ticks, and still be plus. So I think that's kind of what the change he made um, in the second half, which obviously worked out for him because I believe it was he was negative against fastballs, negative batted run value in the first half, and he
Hmm.
was not quite to his 23 level in the second half, but it was pretty darn close. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Olson's swing is kind of more of an uppercut,
Hmm.
not really like a flat swing, so it makes it a
Right.
little bit tougher to, deal with pitches at the top of the zone.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if, the fastball locations that he was seeing in 2024 were
Hmm.
higher, like, more higher fastballs compared to the ones he was seeing in 2023.
Hmm. Yeah.
That could, explain, a few of these issues.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think the graph that you provided in the article is pretty clear in the
Hmm.
sense that,
Yeah.
like, he's very much between 74 75 in terms of his rolling 100 swings, bat
Hmm.
speed, and then, like, basically after August, like, that just
Yeah.
drops down to like
Yeah.
73.
Hmm.
It gets back up to 74 by the end of the season, but, like,
Hmm.
it does feel like there was a little bit of a, oh yeah, we're gonna
Yeah.
reduce this just a tiny
Yeah, a
bit.
line. Yeah, you see that line hit, and then that's kind of a signal to where maybe he started to change things right around this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I am kind of curious if we've got spring training data on this. Obviously, it's,
Hmm.
incredibly small sample size. He's probably swung
Hmm.
like maybe what, like 20, 30 times
Right.
so far in spring.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say if, that's a change that he's incorporating into his arsenal right now, or if he's, back up to being a,
Hmm.
90 percentile swing rate guy.
Right.
But
Yeah, I've seen
that is
some spring bat speed numbers roll out there on X and Twitter, but I'm not sure if it's 100% publicly available. But I have
sure.
seen
Yeah.
some of them out there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The next guy we're going to talk about here is Yainer Diaz, who, yeah, really great season for him last year.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people were expecting good things from Yainer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he also started the season really slowly.
Yeah, he did.
But then it's almost like a copy of the Matt Olson swing speed chart, where it's like
Hmm.
it's pretty steady, and then mid July hits, and then it drops just a tick.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, what you mentioned some small changes with his mechanics in the article.
Hmm.
Um, does it make sense to attribute the
Hmm.
improvement we saw because of those changes in swing mechanics, or do you think there's something else there with Diaz?
Yeah, I do think there is a little bit of noise there. I tried to, exclude some of the guys that we knew were dealing with injuries, in the first half, kind
Hmm.
of for what's reported out there. Like for instance, with Machado, we knew he was dealing with the elbow early in the season. So obviously he was gonna, as the season went on, he felt better, his bat speed increased. So we kind of explained that away. No, there's always some guys that are dealing with, stuff that we just don't hear about. They're playing through stuff. So we can attribute that to some of these guys. We just don't know though. That's just pure speculation. But with Diaz, yeah, I feel like he's a super aggressive hitter. He has an obscene chase rate, a really high chase rate. He swings a lot. So I feel like it's just kind of he's just going to be streaky by nature. That's just going to lead to more volatile outcomes. But his quality of contact did kind of tick up in the second half. Like his hard hit rate was 50%, which is up 5% from the first half. His barrel rate, while not quite to the 2023 level of 12%, which is really really good. He got back up to 9%. Um, so it's just a rare ability for him as a catcher with that ability to make contact, hit for a high average, and still pop 20 plus home runs. I know he didn't quite get there last year, but he has that sort of upside.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think he gets there this year?
I think so. Yeah, I think he should. I mean, I've no reason to, because he's gonna get all the playing time,
Hmm.
all the similar playing time as last year, and um, yeah, I'm a believer in his profile, his power.
Right. It. Yeah. I think you also kind of point out that um, even though the even though he's squaring out the ball more, right? It does come with more strikeouts, but his strikeout
Yeah,
numbers are like fine, right?
yeah,
They're not.
exactly.
He's not
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
30% guy, right? He's
yeah,
more in the
yeah.
20s or low
He makes
20s.
plenty of contact, so he can concede, a little bit of contact for more power. Yeah.
Hmm. All right, so we got two vets. And I want to talk about two young guys here in Victor Robles and I guess Joe Adell's not really a young guy anymore, but
Yeah.
basically both sort of post high prospects. Um, yeah, and I want to talk about Robles first because I think he's really interesting in the fact that like he's doing well in Seattle, which like doesn't seem to make sense for any sort of hitters. Like, oh, you
Right.
move to Seattle and now you become a better
Hmm.
batter.
Yeah.
So yeah, what happened with Robles going basically? I mean, like you mentioned in the other article, he goes from a bottom five hitter based on
Hmm.
WRC plus to a guy who in one half of the season has 154 WRC plus.
Yeah.
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 So what changed for Robles?
Yeah, so it is fascinating because we've seen a lot of these stories about right-handed hitters specifically going to Seattle and just falling off a cliff. We that story about Teoscar Hernandez, how we just couldn't see,
Yeah.
he couldn't see the ball. So it's fascinating that Robles found the secret in Seattle. But I think really just the biggest thing is he cut his strikeout rate by a lot. I mean, the biggest thing is around 18% strikeout rate for the season, um, which is really really good for him because he's not going to hit the ball hard. Like his hard hit rate was in the 20%, 27% last year. Um, he's just not going to hit for a ton of power. I think he can tap into a little bit of power on the pull side. Like he's shown the willingness to do that. He's pulled the ball a decent amount throughout his career. Um, but I mean, he made more contact in the zone. He made more contact overall. Um, and so you can't really do both as a hitter. You can't not hit for power and not make contact. Then you're not in the league at that point, which is what he was getting close to. I mean, he got DFA'd by the Nationals, so he was bordering on that.
Hmm.
But whatever the Seattle coaching staff did, whatever adjustments he made, he definitely worked out for him. I know it was a little bit of fortune because his BABIP was super inflated, and I kind of pointed out that kind of cohort of hitters that him and Parker Meadows, who was also in the reducers article, collection of hitters who just they didn't take a ton of walks, didn't hit the ball hard, didn't barrel up the ball. Um, Generally, that's not a good combination. Generally, that leads to below average outcomes. But those guys, they ran higher BABIPs and they had really good second halves. So
Hmm. Yeah, I think what's fascinating about Robles is that in the swing speed chart that you posted in the article, granted it's from
Mhm.
mid July to end of October, so it's only half a
Mhm.
season of sample,
Right.
but he drops from a 25th percentile swing speed to just like more or
Yeah.
less like maybe 5%, right?
Yeah.
Like he drops his swing speed all the way down, and yet we see improvement from him, which I think is
Yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah.
But when you saw that, kind of what was kind of going through your head on like trying to explain what was going on with Robles?
Yeah, I don't know if I can really buy into it because I think like maybe the contact strides are legitimate.
Hmm.
It's just 1 year, but we maybe it is. Maybe he made some other swing tweak that's kind of harder, more subtle to notice. Um, but he did shorten up. He did lower his bat speed, so maybe it was a more just an emphasis on swinging less hard and just optimizing, making contact and putting the ball in play and see what happens pretty much because he has, plenty of speed. So he will run higher BABIPs.
Yeah.
So it's not totally um, lucky, but I think there is a good amount of fortune here. So
Hmm. Yeah, I think one thing's super interesting about his 2024 in comparison to 2023, although it's funny enough, the numbers kind of line up with how 2020 to 2022 are, is that
Hmm.
his ground ball rate decreased by 10%, going
Hmm.
from 23 to 24, and he got the ball in the air more in 20 between 23 and 24, increasing line drive rate, increasing his fly ball rate.
Hmm.
But then the funny thing is that those stats are kind of like exactly in line with how his 2020 to 2022
Yeah,
seasons are. So
yeah, it's
it's like,
fascinating. It
yeah,
really
you try to
is.
like
Yeah.
get something from it, and you're like, I don't really know if there's
Yeah,
anything
because
there.
he's tried that approach before. He's tried, to spray line drives, and, hit the ball for contact, and it
Yeah,
just didn't work for him in the past. And he tried to hit for power after that 2019 season, and
yeah,
didn't work for him. But now it kind of is. We'll
yeah.
see.
I mean, do you think in terms of Robles and where he goes in fantasy drafts, obviously his ADP is like way way out there. Like no one's
Mhm.
drafting this guy
Yeah,
to be a top three outfielder.
yeah,
Well, I mean his ADP is around 200, so maybe someone
right.
is. But
Hmm.
like at this point, he's really a guy you're getting for maybe runs, uh,
Yeah,
stolen
stolen
bases for
bases
sure.
is the biggest thing.
Maybe
Yeah,
some like. Do you think this
yes,
could lead to some
sneaky
average
average.
improvement?
Yeah, I think it could be a decent. I'm not going to say like a high batting average, but it could be,
Yeah,
250, 260,
right.
which is makes him pretty. That's a like a fairly rare combination because it's not going to be non-zero power. Like it's not
Yeah.
going to be like it'll probably be around 10 to
Hmm.
15 ish. Um, but if he can steal 30 bases, hit for 250 average, like that's interesting.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, it is key to remember. Like the big thing with Robles is his speed, right? It's why his
yeah.
BABIPs have consistently actually been really
Hmm.
good, right? He has a career 311 BABIP, which is
Yeah.
insane.
Hmm.
And that the guy's played. He's been playing in the majors since
That's a
2017.
large enough sample to where we can
Yeah,
believe that's what he
yeah,
is. Yeah.
yeah. The guy's had 2,000 plate appearances. I think like that. That's like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
we
this is
can
a little
believe it.
real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of average, like it is weird to think about Robles as like a legitimate like three category contributor at this
Hmm.
stage in his career.
Yeah.
But yeah, the runs maybe need to improve a little bit, and who knows how
Mhm.
well that's going to work for him
Yeah.
because that Seattle offense is
Yeah, we'll see
not
what
that good.
we'll see what that offense looks like. Yeah, they didn't do anything to add to it really, and
No.
yeah, so it could just be a two. Could be, I mean, really could just be steals if the average,
Yeah.
falls back a little bit. But
Right.
there is um, possibility for that.
Yeah. All right. One last guy we want to talk about who probably a lot of managers have been frustrated by is Joe Adele,
Hmm. Yeah.
who very frustrating because the guy. I think the book on Adele is like this guy hits the ball incredibly hard,
Hmm.
but does not do anything with it.
Yeah.
2024 actually like was a positive season for him in the
Yeah.
fact that he got 20 homers and 15 steals. And that's like the high water mark for his career so far,
Hmm.
which obviously is a far cry from what a lot of people were hoping for what Adele could be.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so what small changes did you see in his swing mechanics that could provide maybe some hope for what 2025 could look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a prime example of a guy that has, all the tools you could ever want. But the hit tool is the biggest thing that will hold these guys back. And that has for the majority of his career. And he showed improvement in that the hit tool in 2024. I mean, his swinging strike rate fell all the way down to 13.9%, which is the best it's ever been. He made more contact in the zone. He still maintained his quality of contact, which is, really good barrel rate, really good hard hit rate. He walked a little bit more too, so all good things. Um, and I mean, he actually had a pretty good defensive year as well, and he's primed to play center field now this year. So
Mm-hmm.
premium defensive spot. And then yeah, all the power and speed you could want really. Um, like it's certainly there's certainly a lot of upside here. Certainly, there's also no floor for average probably. Like it was a
Yeah.
really ugly 2015 season. It was like a 200 average, which is pretty ugly. Um, but I mean, he did get pretty unlucky as far as the BABIP goes. It was career low for him, 244 compared to 281 for his career. So a little bit below the standard there. So if it could tick back up, could be like a 220, 230 average. That's maybe reasonable. But then, I mean, could hit for 25 home runs, 15 stolen bases. That's what he's projected for. by Oopsie, which is the one that I look at for him because that's the most rosy colored for him.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I think it's certainly worth buying. I've been a big fan of Adele for a while, and now we've seen some incremental steps to improve in that K rate. So if he can stick around that 28% mark, even around 30%, um, I think there's a little bit of upside here and worth buying into at his cost.
Yeah. I think the frustrating thing about Adele, and you point this out in your article a little bit, like looking at um, his Seager, which it was a
Hmm.
status created by
Robert Orr,
Robert
yeah.
Orr. Yes, yeah,
Hmm.
Baseball Prospectus. And then
Hmm.
you look at also like pitcherless metrics on like swing decision and strikes on judgment.
Hmm.
This guy like knows the zone,
Yeah, yeah,
like he makes
exactly,
good
yeah,
swing decisions.
yeah.
He's got great power, good speed,
Hmm.
and for some reason, none of those things come together at exactly the same time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We try and Frankenstein all these guys together, put together their best season in this category, best season in this
Hmm.
category, try to mush it all together, but never quite works out that way.
Right. Yeah. It feels like with Adele, a lot of it just needs to click. Right. It's like
Hmm.
this guy's probably he probably has an incredible ceiling,
Hmm.
but like you
Yeah.
said, the floor is just not
Yeah.
there.
The floor is bottomed out by, the hit tool. So,
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and I think that's what makes him frustrating for definitely weekly and daily leagues. If you're
hmm.
like head to head categories or something like that, maybe it kind of balances itself out in a roto league because you know what you're going to
Hmm.
get with Adele at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just looking at his process plus, like this guy went from a rolling like one, he almost got up to 120 process plus in like
Hmm.
June, dropped down to 90, and then he ended up
Yeah.
finishing the season right around 100, which is like,
Yeah.
huh,
He's just gonna be streaky, peaks and valleys for this
yeah,
guy. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
It is pretty frustrating.
Hmm. No
But
doubt.
it is notable that the swing speed like you're mentioning here, right? He went from, it was only a point 0.3 mile per hour decrease, but
Hmm.
because he has such a high swing speed,
Yeah.
right? Like those incremental subtractions in swing speed
Hmm.
ultimately don't actually hurt his
Yeah.
ability to still power the ball.
Yeah. And he shortened up just a little bit, made that slight tweak to his stance. He had a higher leg kick in the first half, and then kind of went to a little toe tap, a little more controlled in the second half. And that he had a 25% strikeout rate in the second half, which is a big step forward for him. So if he can, like we said, kind of put the pieces together, um, certainly you kind of have to, be mindful of the builds you have him with because, the average could be like really poor, could
Hmm.
be, 200 level, which he did last year. So if you can kind of mush them together with, another high average guy, kind of a boring average guy, won't hit for many homers, like a Colt Keith kind of makes sense. That's one of the guys I paired him with. Um, in the DGFBI, so he's gonna hit for 270-ish average, and then balance out by Adele, who could hit for 210 or something
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the good thing for Adele, like you mentioned, is that he basically has no competition. No
Right.
one's pushing him
Yeah.
for that center field
Yeah.
spot. The only other
Yeah.
player on that team is Mickey Moniak, and
Yeah.
uh,
I think we've
it's,
seen what Mickey Moniak is. Yeah.
we know what he's got, and it's the
Yeah.
ceiling is nowhere near Adele's. The floor is about the
Yeah.
same. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
yeah. Hopefully the Angels also see that as well, but
Yeah.
we'll see
Let's
how that
hope
works
so.
out.
Yeah.
Right. All right, so that wraps it up for the bat speed reducers article. Like you mentioned, you also wrote about Parker Meadows here.
Mhm.
Another guy who I think has a lot of interesting hype around him.
Mhm.
Hopefully, he can hold on to a job in Detroit.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
like,
I think he's banked up right now too. So hopefully he gets
yeah,
gets healthy. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of unfortunate. Like that team is dealing with some stuff. I think Matt Vierling is
Yeah.
also out, and so
Yeah. They are. Yeah.
now, as a Twins fan, I don't mind this, but in terms of the general, like fantasy
Right.
landscape, it is
Right.
unfortunate that they're dealing with with these injuries because that is a
Yeah.
young team that has a lot of interesting promise with
Mhm.
it. So, but yeah,
Mhm.
definitely check that out. Obviously, in terms of the podcast format, we don't have any fun graphs or tables here, so definitely check out Kyle's articles because they're chock full of good graphics, good tables, just kind of help explain what's going on here
Mhm.
with these with swing speed and just in general with a bunch of these metrics that we're talking about. So,
Mhm.
Yeah, before we let you go, Kyle, yeah, just kind of let the people know how can they, follow you on social media, or if you've got any articles that are coming out on Pitch List soon, or just anywhere else. Feel free to share what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm over on X at Kyle Baseball 7, and not don't have any articles planned right now, but definitely will have something planned in the future, and we'll be posting about it. So
All right, sounds good. Yeah, hopefully the Nationals do something good this year, because I feel like they've been
yeah,
a sneaky pick for a lot of people. Like kind of
Mhm.
they're
Yeah,
not really a dark horse in how many people are like picking them to be
yeah.
like the
I mean,
the
they're
seventh, the number 7 team in the wild card.
yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, their pitching like was like on paper like they didn't have any guys last year, but I mean
yeah,
they overperformed, and
yeah,
maybe they made some changes to the coaching staff, so maybe they can do that again. We'll see.
yeah. I'll just say the DJ Hers hype is real. I
Yeah,
don't know if I believe it,
I
but
don't
the
know if
hype
I
is
believe it
real.
either. There's a lot of hype around DJ Hurts. I'm not sure if I'm a believer either, but we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, I have him on my dynasty team, and it was like
Yeah,
he went from like a guy I was just gonna drop to be like, maybe I'm gonna hold on to hers just a
yeah.
little
You
bit
never
longer and
know.
see what
At
happens.
least maybe a streamer. Maybe that's maybe
Yeah,
what he can be. Yeah, maybe
exactly,
more.
exactly. Yeah. Well, that's
Mhm.
gonna wrap it up for this episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. Again, you can find us at This Week PL on Twitter. Send us your comments and questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at the John Cuh. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Pitcher List podcast feed, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you listen to your podcast. Leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. And lastly, sign up for Pitcher List Plus. By doing so, you can join us in the Pitcher List Discord. Obviously, we are talking a lot of baseball right now in the Discord. It is popping off, so definitely head over there if you just need some advice on drafts, because I know we're full into draft season.
Mhm.
Opening day is technically next week with
Yeah,
the Cubs and the Dodgers. Although, if you really ask me, the real opening day is in 2 weeks. So,
yeah.
um, but yeah, baseball season is ramping up, so definitely check out the Discord for all your baseball needs. But yeah, that's gonna be it for this episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Kyle, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later,
Mhm.
everyone.